Sound Speeds, and welcome back to the Sound Speeds podcast, another wonderful podcast on the Geeks Rising podcast network. I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get right into our content. There are many viewers that like to ask content creators that do microphone reviews or something to do with sound for a microphone recommendation. But personally, I don't like doing them, and I'm going to explain why right now. First of all, I don't know their environment. I don't know if it's treated, if it's untreated, if they're in a downtown metropolitan area and there's no amount of soundproofing you can possibly do to make the sound not come into that room. There was somebody who years ago asked me for a microphone recommendation. I gave him a few, and then they said, well, nothing that you recommended is going to sound good. I then asked them why. And they basically told me that they were in the middle of, I think it was India or someplace. It was extremely noisy. And there was a nightclub directly downstairs that was blasting music. I'm like, you're never going to be able to record something in that environment. Nothing I recommend is going to magically eliminate all the background noise that you have to deal with. You got to find someplace quieter to actually record. But somehow the recommendations that I made for microphone went right out the window because he was expecting me to somehow recommend something that was going to completely eliminate all the background noise. I have no idea what kind of an environment you're in. I could give you some rules of thumb, like if you want to try to get away with not treating your environment, try to go for more of a dynamic microphone. But then someone else online is going to say, if you do that, then you're not going to have a full frequency response. So then I will look like an idiot if I don't recommend everything else. Like, for example, people that bought in on the whole Blue Yeti thing, even though there are better sounding USB microphones out there. Originally, the Yeti was one of the first ones that like really made it mainstream. But then everyone started recommending Blue Yetis out of convenience, out of the fact that they were so used to the Yeti. And to me, when Bandrew kind of, when he kind of discovered the Samson Q2U and kind of started telling people about that, I said, I'm going to listen to it. It is now the only USB microphone I will actually recommend. Why? Because it's a hybrid. It starts as USB, or you can also go XLR with it. So you can go either one. If you want to start with just as a USB microphone, then add an audio interface, it will still sound relatively the same. And you can go XLR out of the same microphone and not tremendously change your sound. To me, I like that approach. It is a dynamic, so it's going to be better for, the untreated environments. And it actually sounds good. It's like an anomaly. It's one of those things where engineering wise, it just happened to magically work for some reason. Even though it's not an extremely expensive microphone, it just magically seems to work. Unlike other microphones that are more expensive, they might not sound as good. And that might be also another reason why microphone recommendations I personally don't like to make. Some microphones I like are not extremely expensive microphones. And people say, don't you only want to recommend the $1,000+ microphones because you're a pro? No. If a microphone sounds good, I'm going to recommend it. But I don't like doing that because then people will start to question some of my judgment because they're going to say, well, why did you recommend a Rode? Pros don't like Rodes. Okay, then don't take any recommendation I have if you're just going to be a brand snob like that. There are some microphones in some circumstances that I will recommend for certain reasons to certain people with certain budgets for whatever their purpose is. And there are other microphones that I would not recommend, even though they're a $3,000 microphone, because it's not going to serve their purpose. My point here is there are different reasons as to why you might recommend a certain microphone. And if you do a blanket, this is what serves a lot of people for many different reasons, it may not serve somebody. And then they're going to come back and say, well, I don't like the way this one sounds, which brings me to another point. Everybody hears differently. Something that may sound good to me may not sound good to you, or vice versa. There are many people that like the sound of the Sanken CSM1. But personally, I hate the way that microphone sounds. Yes, I know it's lightweight. Yes, I know that if you put it on the end of a boom, it's going to be very lightweight. And so I should technically like it for that reason. But to me, it's got no low end. It's extremely sharp and just too many highs. And I happen to notice a trend that if you weren't somebody who really liked to have extremely hyper detailed, and that's because it boosts up if you look at it, the frequency response, there's no low end. It's a upward hill both ways, as we want to jokingly say with regards to going to school. But because of that, I've happened to notice a trend online. Many of the people that really like the microphone are older, so they probably can't hear the highs nearly as well as they used to be able to. So they might like that microphone because it boosts the highs in a frequency range that they can hear more. Not everybody. Some people that I know like the microphone have extremely good hearing, but then I still disagree with them on that particular microphone because we just don't hear the same. Somebody may end up liking a particular microphone because they have damaged hearing, or because they don't have damaged hearing, and because they have very guarded and preserved hearing because they were raised in an environment where it was maybe out in the country and they didn't expose themselves to very many loud noises. It could also be that you spent time in war and your hearing is not great. So a microphone may sound good to you because it boosts up certain frequencies that allow you to hear those frequencies more linear. It could be a whole bunch of different reasons. Biologists play into that as well. So there could be a whole bunch of different reasons as to why I don't like to make microphone recommendations. I will give a blanket of, here's a few for you to consider, but I always tell people the same thing. Listen to it and determine what you like the best, because I can make recommendations all day long, but if it's not something that you like, because you're going to try to go on something that I recommend or somebody else recommends, well, this person recommends this and this, but I don't like the way that thing sounds. Go with what you like the sound of. Don't go with what other people like the sound of if it's not something you like. Everybody else's opinion doesn't matter when you are recording your own sound for yourself. You need to care about the sound that you care about and the way that you want it to sound. Now, I'm not recommending that you go out of your way to buy an extremely expensive microphone because you feel that that's something you need to do. But as a rule of thumb, what I would say is try to get a microphone that sounds the way you want it to without you having to do any post-processing on it, if at all possible. You don't want to get a microphone just so that you can EQ the thing to death. Because most of the time, if you try to EQ something that engineers already tweaked, you're going to make it sound worse. Many people do, especially when they first start out with their audio recording. They start to EQ and they start to mess with this and that and the other, and then they end up completely jacking up their sound to the point where it doesn't sound good anymore. Curtis Judd did the, what was it called? The Mix Master Challenge or something like that, where people would submit their recordings of themselves, and then he would bring in a panel of experts. I was on one of them. And one of the things that we would do is talk about their signal processing, what they could do to make their sound better. And what was generally across the board, one of the things that people did was they felt that they had to constantly tweak and play around with it, even though their sound would most likely sound better if they did nothing. The sound I do on this channel is very minimally processed. Usually I knock out the background noise, and then I compress it. I don't do any EQ because you don't need to. As long as you set things up and you do things the right way, you don't need to actually EQ and try to do too much to your sound, because too much is going to be worse than if you don't do enough. Believe it or not. There you go. There are many people out there doing content creation, and there's many people out there that buy the same kind of cameras that we use in content creation, but they use it for their own home movies or explorations or whatever they happen to do. But one of the tricks that I developed a while ago is something I'm going to show you if you like to use something that involves a gimbal, something like this DJI Pocket 2 device that I personally like, because it's the same exact kind of camera that they have on the drones, the DJI drones. So you can go all over the place, and it's going to pretty much on the fly instantly adjust and keep everything fairly level and flat. It's not going to twist. I mean, you could twist the handle all over the place, walk, and it's still angled at the exact same direction. But one thing I developed a trick for that I'm going to show you right now, if you ever use a camera like this, I'm going to rotate it over here this way. Let's just say that I'm doing a walk and talk, or I'm trying to follow somebody leading them. I'm going to be walking backwards. One of the things that people constantly have a problem with is keeping a camera on the person that they're going to be wanting to track while keeping themselves safe and not stepping over something wrong. So one of the tricks that I developed is an old trick that we used when we did skeet shooting, when you do skeet shooting, which is if you are basically doing skeet shooting, one of the things you can do is lay your hand across the front of the barrel, but put your finger pointing beside the barrel. So it's pointing straight out. That way you basically point at whatever it is you want to aim at. Don't aim, but actually point at what it is. So you would normally want to aim, but don't. Instead, point, because your brain has the ability to lock in on something and point directly at it based on knowing that it's a certain distance. It knows where your hand is. It knows where your finger is. And your brain does the calculation as to if I see this thing is 50 feet away and it's that particular direction, I don't have to go straight down the barrel with my finger to nail it on axis with my finger. I can very simply just, with my hand down here by the side, point it where it is because my brain does the calculations and knows that my hand is spatially going to be, 8 inches over to the left of center and about 1.5 feet down from my face. It's going to be able to do that. Similarly, if you have something like this, if you point your finger at the bottom, from the bottom, and you point it outwards in the direction that the camera is pointed, if you do something like this, like right now, it's angled kind of high. So I would need to angle it down. Once it is more in line with where my finger is, I basically can position my finger also to emulate the direction it's going. So it's exactly pointed the direction it is going. Now, I know this is a camera related thing, so stay with me though. If I were to now turn and walk away from the direction that the camera is pointed, and use my ears to hear the mouth of the person that is talking, I point at their mouth because my ears are going to be able to dial in the direction. Just like how if I close my eyes right now and you do a little sound over here, I'm going to be able to tell, my brain's going to be able to do the calculation that it is in front of me because it's not muffled because, going off the back of your ears. It is able to pick up the sound more in this ear than this ear, and spatially it's going to be able to determine that it is in that direction. So I'm going to be able to, with my eyes closed, pretty much pick out wherever the sound is. Similarly, if I am walking one direction while I'm basically walking forward, but I'm pointing the camera behind me at the person who's talking and point at their face, the camera is going to be able to center in on them and keep them on camera. That is a little trick that you can use sound for with regards to pointing your camera. Now, you might want to glance over your shoulder every now and then so that way you see the screen to verify that everything is exactly where you would want it to be. Because the worst thing in the world would be is if this camera, this gimbal suddenly started looking up too high or something like that. And you're like, whoa, why is it looking too high? You want to glance back at it every now and then. But once you kind of have your direction, you can bounce around and whatever, and it's going to be fine because it is pointing in the same direction as your finger. And as long as you point at the pie hole of someone, the person who's speaking, it's going to pretty much keep that camera on them the entire time during your walk and talk. So that way you can walk forward while safely stepping over the ground while using your ears to hear the person who's talking and to simply point behind you at their mouth. And as long as you framed up well to begin with, it should maintain that frame pretty well. You might need to tweak a little bit every now and then while you're doing the walk and talk, but that's something that you could very easily glance over your shoulder and say, okay, I'm holding a little bit too high a headroom, so I'm not gonna now angle downwards and then correct with your finger to compensate for that. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're not too high up because you don't want to have your finger coming into the shot. But with these devices, you can go relatively low and you're still going to avoid the field of view of the camera. It's going to be great. So there you go, using your ears to help you get a better shot on your camera, something like this that has a 3 gimbal axis. And booyah, another episode of the Sound Speeds podcast in the can. I'm going to say the thing because I'm going to say the thing and mean the thing because I like saying the thing. It reminds me of being on set, and I miss being on set. Anyway, if you have a question you would like me to answer in an upcoming episode of the SoundSpeeds podcast, please email me at alan@soundspeeds.us. Email address is in the description below, and it's at the end of this video as well. And if you submit that to me, I will answer it in an upcoming episode. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the SoundSpeeds podcast, and I will see you in the future with more podcasting type information and, as always, sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.